Welcome to this event in the 2020 Portobello Book Festival. My name is May Shaw and I'm a member of the organising group. The festival is organised annually by a local group of enthusiastic readers and writers in conjunction with and in support of the local public library. Books featured can be found at the Portobello Bookshop. I would like to thank today's contributors for their willingness to participate in this reconfigured festival. Thank you for joining us and we hope you enjoy it.
I'm here in Glenlownan in beautiful Argyll, although it's a bit drizzly today, as it often is in Argyll, to meet with the poet and author Leonie Charlton, whose beautifully poetic first book, Marram, came out just recently. Well, thanks for letting us come and visit you, Leonie. So maybe we could start off with you just telling us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Peter. Yep. So I live here in Glenlownan, Argyll. I've lived here for 25 years or so, and I know the area really well because my parents got divorced when I was very young, but my dad was a vet up here, so we used to come up on holiday. And it's pretty much home. So I live here with my husband Martin and 3 children who are, my youngest is just about to leave high school, so they're all on their way out slowly.
And are all these ponies that we saw you with there, are they all yours?
Well, I've got a wee collection going on. One of Ross's half-brothers out there in the field, and he belongs to my friend. And today we've got a visitor. We've got Chief, who's in the book, who's in Marram. He went round the Hebrides with Ross. And we're just back from a 3-day trip to Mull, so that's why he's here at the moment. But yeah, I have a standard herd of 6, and it works well because they've all got a best friend. So no one's ever left out.
How did you come to write your book?
Well, a good friend of ours mentioned many years ago how she'd like to ride around the Outer Isles, and it sparked something off in my head. I thought, my God, what an amazing idea, and that'll probably never happen, but what an idea. Anyway, with my friend Shuna and I, the idea grew until in 2017 we actually did it. So it does feel like a trip of a lifetime, and it feels like a dream. That did that really happen, and how on earth did we make that happen? But it did.
Must have taken some organising though.
A lot of organising, thinking the logistics of Calmac and ferries and what will happen if boats are cancelled and where will we stay, and we also had we've done a lot of trips together over the years, but on the mainland. So we set off with the ponies and you've got your gear and then that's you on the road. But with the Hebrides we had to go with the horse box, so there was a bit of leapfrogging to do. So sometimes we'd have to drive the trailer and pick up ahead of us and then hitch back to the ponies and do it that way. So we did it with a lot of fluidity, and there were some things that weren't fluid, like the ferry bookings. So, yeah, lots of bits of paper, notes and...
So at some point it must have occurred to you, this is going to be a book, but I mean, did you plan it ahead? Were you taking notes? How did that, how did that process work? Did you just go from memory? What happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. He's interested in what I've got in my pocket.
Well, you might as well feed him.
Although we might have to stop in a minute, Rossi. We've done, like I mentioned, we've done quite a few long trips, my friend Shuna and I, and the ponies. And I always travel with a notebook, a little pocket notebook, pencil, because it doesn't run and it works in the rain. And I've got a stack of notebooks in the house, and I rarely ever do anything with the notes. Anyway, we set off to the Hebrides with my notebook. And the difference with this trip was that we were there for the ride and the horse time and the exploring and the travelling, but I also was trying to let go of this pain I had around my mum's death. So she died 7 years previously, and it wasn't getting any easier. it was a tough relationship when she was alive, and it seemed to be getting worse after she was dead, and it was just really hard to live with. And a good friend of mine who lives in Spain said that when her mum died, she'd had similar problems, and she'd done a ritualistic thing, and I can't remember what it was, but she said, you know, look into doing something physical to let go or to work through stuff. So just a month before we went on the trip, I had this idea of taking a wee purse of beads. So my mum was a bead collector and a jeweler and travelled the world and had an amazing collection. And I just, it was painful to do, but I just selected a small number of beads and I went with them. And then as we travelled, I laid a bead wherever I was moved to on the trip. And it was a really cathartic experience and much more powerful than I'd imagined it would be. And so I also made notes of that. And when I got back, it was, I was in the middle of writing a novel and I just couldn't. All I wanted to do was write this book. Then it became a book. It became very evident that it was a book once I got back. I'm going to read an extract from day 13, just over halfway through the trip, and we're on the Udall Peninsula in North Uist, a place of amazing human and natural resources. We're riding with a wonderful woman who lives up there called Catherine and her horse, Akiko. And I refer to an art exhibition at one point, which was in the art centre, Tai Kirsava in Lochmaddy. So, we followed Catherine and Akiko across the Macha towards the Udall Peninsula. The wind savaged the strips of plastic silage bale caught in the fences. It spooked the horses and snatched our words away. We rode across cultivated fields, past a wide, shiny tractor and its trailing cloud of wind-spattered gulls. We topped the dunes and Traia, meaning West Beach, spanned out in front of us. It was one of those moments when your senses take off. I shouted something unintelligible at the top of my voice. The cold wind intensified the colours. Valais was an emerald green banner unfurling on our left. Straight ahead, way out across the citrine sand, the sea was a strip of dark aquamarine. Our world was a bright whip of mane and tail and marram grass, and our smiles spun off into the sand. Catherine and Akiko led the way down the dunes towards where the line of white-finned waves met the shore. "How about a gallop then?" shouted Catherine when we caught up. And off we went. There was no way we could keep up with Akiko, who raced ahead through the waves. The 3-beat of the canter turned into the smooth 4-beat of the gallop. Ross and Chief took it in turns to overtake each other, and everything was wide open. No walls, gates, fences, bogs, people, just smooth, wide sand. Exhilarated and laughing, we left the beach at the far end. The ponies felt 10 feet high. How rarely they get the chance to really move out like that, and for them to let us taste the expansion and speed and freedom their DNA is built on. What a privilege. Catherine was taking us to a wheelhouse. Finally, we'd actually see one, it seemed, those Iron Age dwellings. We rode past a coil of rope up in the dunes. A black zigzag of pitch decorated its coils. It was like a giant adder, as big as a sleeping pony, asleep in the sun, tucked in out of the wind, basking. Snakes. Mum had been obsessed with them. Snakes and spiders and all creepy crawlies, as she called them. When my daughter Bria, her first grandchild, was born, she'd refused to be known as Granny or Grandma. Instead, she chose to be known as Lolo, from Chongalolo, a giant African millipede. So Lolo she was. That day, long after her death, when my brothers and I were emptying the Luton van, there'd been a whole box of insect and reptile books. On the top was a hardback with reptiles written simply on its cover in block capitals. Below was a high-resolution photo of a chameleon. Mum had loved her reptiles. She'd a touch of the chameleon herself. could change in a flash, her mood, her allegiances, even her makeup. Stripes of Clinique and Dior in all the colours of peacocks and hummingbirds. Strokes of iridescence that brought out the green in her eyes, green like cats and witches. Mum always said that witches were in the family, that her mother was a witch, that she'd killed her own father, Mum's grandfather, with a curse. That's what she told us. I thought about the exhibition that morning. The lacuna, a genus of small intertidal mollusk, a gap or vacancy, a prolonged silence, a missing piece of text or information. Now I wanted to ask her more about my grandmother being a witch. I wanted to ask her more about so many things. I'd had that small opening when she was dying and I was in softest love with her, when I could have talked to her. But I didn't step into it. None of us did. We'd followed her lead and not talked about her death, not even mentioned it. She'd known when Will and Tom and I were called in to see the consultant, the one in Oban with a bedside manner like a blunt shovel. But Mum hadn't asked what she'd said. She didn't mention her own death. Not once. Not like all those years before when she'd gone in for her first brain surgery when I was 15. She'd come upstairs to talk to Tom and me. If I die, children, I want you to know that I've had a good life, a full life. I've got you three. I've loved deeply. I've adventured. This time, 23 years later, she wasn't saying anything. The tumour had done what tumours do, grown or moved or devoured something vital, and she could no longer talk. We're left with a whole host of lacunae that will never be filled. I can guess and imagine, but I'll never truly know. My memories of her are a palimpsest like the sea-licked lichens on the rocks at our feet, merely a thin, breathing skin over the unfathomable story of rock.
So was that quite a free-flowing experience of writing the book? Did you kind of start and finish sort of like Jack Kerouac or someone? Or did you very purposefully write a chapter, go over it, write it again? How did it work?
Okay, so I'm great at starting things and not finishing them. I had a lot of drive for this book, and I did work with a mentor just to keep me on track. And I feel a bit embarrassed about saying that. It's like, but it was the best thing I ever did. You do whatever. I couldn't bear for this to be something I began and didn't finish. So I worked throughout a winter, start to finish. And for me, that's incredibly fast. And I put just about everything else in my life to one side. And that was my main focus. And I was driven and I loved it. And it flowed relatively easily, and it really wanted to be written. So yeah, it was a pleasure. Not that there weren't some really hard days, and some of the stuff's really hard to write. Shed quite a few tears writing, but
the book is about lots of different kinds of relationships. Your relationship with the landscape, your relationship with Ross and Shuna and Chief. But your relationship with your mother kind of keeps forcing its way through. Can you talk a little bit about how all these kind of relationships maybe came together and sort of helped each other even maybe?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. All the relationships are important. I had the time and space to really go into my relationship with my mum, just to be. It was like I was spending time with her every day. I do, since that trip, I have a very strong feeling, and I continue to have a strong feeling that when someone dies, that's Martin on the quad bike. When someone dies, your relationship continues. And I feel that I will be in relationship with my mother for the rest of my life. And in terms of other relationships, all my life, having relationships with animals and landscape has been my go-to place for feeling okay about being in the world. That's where I get grounded and I feel safe, and that's where I get great delight. So we were in the Hebrides, we had time, and I could just go into the relationship with my mum in a whole new way, whilst being in companionship with Ross and Shuna and the landscape and all the people we met. We met some fabulous people.
Just before we move on from the relationships thing, there's, of course, your relationship with yourself comes out quite strongly in the book. Can you maybe give us a bit of backstory?
That one. Do we have to talk about that one? Yes. Work in progress. My relationship with myself. So I have I've had a sort of I've had questions around my identity all my life. I moved around a lot as a child, many primary schools, different countries. I went to secondary school in Kirkcudbright, and I was there for a whole 6 years down in Dumfries and Galloway. But I've always had an accent that was not of the place I was living. My parents both travelled a lot. Neither of them belonged to a place, as I understand it. And I've got no sense of that deep-rooted belonging to a place. So I've always thought of that as something to be ashamed of, and something I really wished was different. And I'm beginning to accept, writing the book really helped, but I am who I am. I belong here. Scotland is where I belong. That is my home, where my heart and soul is. And there are many types of belonging. There's not just that generational weddedness to a place, which is a thing of great beauty, and I will always envy people who have that. But coming into a place and finding your own belonging gives you a way of looking at things very freshly. So I'm thankful for that. I go to a place and my eyes are wide open and my ears are wide open, and I'm listening and I'm seeing and I'm marveling constantly.
So on top of these, maybe we could call them emotional challenges, there were a lot of physical and environmental challenges. And without spoiling the book for people who are going to read the book, maybe you could take us through some of those physical challenges?
Yeah. In any trip where you're outside all day and carrying things, well, there are always days where you get cold or tired or hungry, crabby, worried. The Hebrides, this trip actually on the whole was a really easy trip. The beach riding was incredible compared to other trips we've done, which have been pretty hard going, long, like 14, 16-hour days and very difficult terrain. This was a relatively easy trip, except for 3 days in the middle of Harris, in the heart of Harris, which were pretty brutal on lots of levels. I'm not going to say too much, but it took me to a real edge. It took my pony to an edge. It took all four of us to edges, and I had a dark night of the soul, and I don't think I've been the same since. It changed a lot for me, that experience. So I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful. I'm thankful we got out okay. This is a short extract from the final day of the trip. And we're on Lewis at the Standing Stone Circles at Callanish. Within minutes, the standing stones of Callanish came into sight, and we had the place entirely to ourselves. We rode the ponies through a gate and wandered in silence amongst these megaliths of Lewisian gneiss. Even sitting on the ponies, we were dwarfed by the stones. Ross and Chief reached out and touched them with their noses. These stones that had been there for millennia. A German couple arrived, smiling, huge camera lenses resting in the crooks of their arms like babies. I asked them if they'd take a photo of us and handed them my phone. I have the picture now. Us amongst those stones that reached into a sky awash with clouds, stones and clouds and ponies. And our wide, wind-chapped smiles. We continued down the road and along a track towards Callanish 2. A stile straddled the stock fence. There was no way through for the boys, so we left them tied. Over their backs we could make out Callanish 1, a host of stones on the horizon. Callanish 2 and 3 were altogether wilder places. There was no mowed grass here, and I felt at home with the mellow smell of cow dung. Even this late in the evening, skylarks were singing. Every once in a while, a vehicle would judder across the cattle grid on the main road. Snipe drummed against the last of the day. I sat down with my back against a sloping stone. Here, most of the stones stood at rakish angles. The cattle and sheep had made hollows in the ground where they sheltered and rubbed against them. On some stones, tufts of cattle hair clung to the lichen. On others, the marbled rock had been polished smooth. The cattle must love it here, I said. Later, over a cup of tea and a plate of dropped scones, Sheena, who was the common grazings clerk, told us that Historic Scotland had sent her a letter inviting her to come and look at the damage the beasts were doing. What did you say to them? I asked. Oh, I let the letter lie, she answered, her eyes shining. I think we deserve a toast, said Shuna, walking over from the stone she'd been leaning against and passing me the hip flask. To these stones, to us, to skylarks, to Chief and Ross, she said. I took a long sip of Oban 14-year-old. Light on the peat, notes of cut hay, tarry ropes, and the sea, the bottle says. Here's to Mum, who loved the smell of hot tar, to Mum, who loved so much. We walked the ponies slowly back towards Callanish 1. We couldn't resist a last dander amongst the stones. I put my hand on rock that had been crushed and melted and folded for over 3,000 million years. Rock that was embedded with crystals of feldspar, white quartz, hornblende. Stones that had been shaped and raised by a people 5,000 years ago. To the east of us, a soft, cottony moon, one day off full, was surfacing in the sky.
I know you're a poet and you're a writer, but how did you come to this in the first place? Did you as a child, did you keep a diary? What was it? Or has it just always been there and you don't think about it? But now, now you've written a novel, that's a huge step from writing a poem, isn't it?
Yeah, to have completed a book is massive. Massive respect to anybody that completes a book. It's a huge piece of work. Takes a lot. So I've always loved writing. English was my favourite subject at school. I studied languages at university. Yeah, my mum gave me a great love of literature. I had no confidence as a writer, but I was drawn to writing. And it was when on holiday on the Isle of Tiree, probably, how many years? I don't know. I'm not very good on time. 12, 15 years ago, a good friend gave me Kathleen Jamie's book of essays called Sightlines. I read this book and something happened. Something happened inside me. It's like, I didn't know this kind of writing was out there. And I suppose I was really motivated to learn more about that. And I extraordinarily, looking back, sent her an email, this person I didn't know, and said, I've just read your book. I absolutely love it. I understand you're a tutor at Stirling. Do you know of any good writing classes that I could go to? And she was away on sabbatical in Alaska or somewhere cold. And her very lovely colleague, Liam Bell, sent me an email saying, well, you sound really keen. How about applying for the Masters at University of Stirling? And it would never have occurred to me. So I very excitedly applied, and to my amazement got accepted. And it was the best thing I've ever done. It changed everything. It suddenly I was, I felt serious about this. I felt committed. I felt, okay, I can dedicate my time to this. This is what I want to do. And I learnt a lot. And I was also introduced to poetry there by Chris Poikia, lecturer at Stirling. And that's been a life changer as well.
And you're going to read a few poems for us.
I'll read a couple of poems, yeah. This is a little poem I wrote on Iona. It's called Getting Away from the Overtalker in Iona Hostel. Freezing sward scours my feet. Morning air cools my tea in the too thick mug far too quickly. Big bare sun lifting over Mull glares my eyes, burns the starling's chatter to sound silhouettes, raises the fence line to a diatribe. And the geese roughly tell it how it really is. And a single brilliant gannet courses the horizon. And the whole while, skylarks are cooking up the blue. And I love, just love, how lapwings change their mind in midair.
Your book, sadly, came out right at the beginning of lockdown and the pandemic. So you sadly weren't able to really celebrate its release, were you?
No, that was a double-edged sword, because I was terrified for months about the release. I had all these things in the diary and book festivals, and it's like, how am I going to do that? But I will, of course I will. I know I will do it, but how? And I was just in processing all that, and how will it be being in front of people, and then literally 2 days before the launch, so I was on it. I was ready. I had the haircut. I knew what I was doing. It was, and had the adrenaline, and then that was it. Everything wiped out. And online, and I do not have a particularly strong online presence, nor do I feel particularly comfortable. So the launch was Twitter. On Twitter, I'd never been on Twitter in my life. Everyone was very supportive and lovely, but not the same as, just standing here now with you and this interaction. It's not, if we'd had this interview on Zoom, it would not be the same. And Zoom is absolutely brilliant, but it's not the same as having the animal in the room, as they say.
Yeah. So what about the future?
The future, I've got loads of ideas. I've still got the original novel that I would really like to finish one day. I've got a poetry collection coming out in the new year, published by Cinnamon Press. That's very exciting. Well, it's a pamphlet, not a collection, which is a small collection. I've got a couple of ideas for non-fiction which I would really like to pursue. I've just co-edited a collection of stories and poems from the Gypsy Traveller community in Scotland, which was a really exciting bit of work, and I'd love to do more of that. And I'm also now working with a sculptor, and we're doing interdisciplinary work together, which is very interesting. So there's loads going on. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Leonie. Good luck with the future, and I'm looking forward to your next book, because I love the one that I just read.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for coming up here. So this is a poem called Stormbound on Egg. I've chosen to read this one because it's got a dark pony in, who unsurprisingly is Ross. So just before lockdown, I was stormbound on Egg with a couple of friends for a week, and the place we were staying looked out on the hills of Rum, which is where Ross's ancestors come from. He's a Rum Highland pony. Stormbound on Egg. Buffeted, you're beating it along the escarpment above Cleedale, past the Finger of God and smoke signalling waterfalls. Storm Kiara growing your strides to match the powerful warrior women they say once roamed this island. Island Nimban Moor. Your life, pitch of this ridge, a summonsing between light and dark, a call to stay with each deep and blistering moment. Questions of balance in storm-bound days. Calmac's MV Loch Nevis birthed in Mallaig and hailstones stinging your skin. Your feet flexing over curves of spheroidal erosion on the shore. Toes widening among swum memories of Hugh Miller's plesiosaurs. Storm starlings flicker in gusts. Gulls and crows lift up and fall back over and over in the roar. Only seals and ravens hold their own. Sea foam blows past like salted butterflies of the full snow moon. Lake Bay, a bivalve holding you in the eye of the storm. Capacities of presence all around in this geology, in your body, in that oyster catcher, hunkering down around her shadow on the wet, steely sand. All of this enthralled to Rum, where his blood runs from. Dark, precious pony who has taught you to be occasionally, solidly present. Back up on that ridge on your own 2 feet, high winds hone your surrender as you head towards the shoulder of your someday death. You think about folding onto your knees, even as you veer west down the zigzag path through wind-groomed heather, in the lean of a powerful woman's skyline brows and nose and breasts, down past 2 bony, watchful horses, back to the beach, to the basalt shelves, to the reptilian languor reminding you to pause here, in a hum of gravity, mid-flow in your longing towards Rum, its coolins, badass and beautiful and silver-happed.